All right, Glenn, thank you for showing up. It's good to see you, as
Yeah,
always.
definitely. You
Um,
too, my man.
I appreciate you doing this. The first couple questions I had for you was just personal questions, checking in on Allie, and I believe it's a daughter.
No, my son.
Son, God, I was
Yeah,
thinking
my
about it
son.
too.
Nah, he's good, man. He's 11 months. He just turned 11 months yesterday,
Okay,
and we're having another one. Allie's
nice.
6 months pregnant now, so
Congratulations.
thanks, man.
And then, do you know on the second one, girl or boy?
Yeah, this time we're having a little girl,
Okay,
so you might have
yeah.
some psychic powers or
No,
something.
for some reason I thought that when you in the program, like all our classmates, all the female classmates were saying like, oh, it's for some reason I thought it was a girl, and they were all giving you a hard time because it was going to be a girl,
Yeah, yeah.
or they
No, I
wanted a
wanted a
girl.
girl, to be honest with you, but it turned
That's
out to
what
be a
it
little
was.
boy. Yeah,
That's what it was. You wanted a girl.
yeah.
Yep, that's what I remember. That was in Klaus's class, wasn't it? That you when we found out.
I believe so. I believe
I
it
want to.
was.
I think that's where that's how I place it.
It was the beginning of the first half of Dr. Klaus's quantitative
Yeah,
research methods class.
seems like a long time ago now.
Man, right? That's been a
Uh,
minute.
but Allie's doing good.
Yeah, she's doing good, man. She's still over at the Modesto Junior College. I'm over at De Anza College right now
Okay.
in the Bay Area, Santa Clara. Uh, still doing the counseling thing. I work in EOP&S right now, and then a little part-time instruction as well.
Okay.
Student success for our college life. So yeah, they keep me pretty busy, man.
So that's perfect segue. The next question for you was, can you kind of just give us a breakdown of what you do now? What kind of looks like a before everything happened with COVID-19 and stuff, but kind of your day-to-day work life. What were you doing in Deanza, and what does that look like for you?
Yeah, man. So it's been crazy. I mean, I'm very fortunate that I'm up there. I like the opportunity, especially with the population that I'm working with. Uh, the short amount of time, because I've only been there, for almost a year now, but I've gotten to work with a lot of different populations, and so my main uh, title is academic counselor for the EOP&S department, but then I also do the part-time instruction as well. And I usually teach, like I said before, the college life success courses. But what's nice though is that I'm an African American male in the higher educational system. It allows me to work with special populations at risk because of my background. It also allows me to work with African American males, which is there's a decline. Uh, Unfortunately, for males in general in the higher educational system, which I'm pretty sure we'll probably talk about later.
Mm-hmm.
But so we'll have like incoming high school students come in. For example, we did this for the African American Ed Conference in February for Black History Month, and so I had a group of students come in from the Bay Area local high schools, and basically higher educational 101, what to expect. So it was a way for me to give back. So my point is, my primary goal is to try to give back as much as possible in whatever assignment that they give me. But as
Mm-hmm.
far as me getting paid, is just being a counselor and a part-time instructor.
So for the counseling always is something that's been interesting to me, and a lot of students will come in liberal studies wanting, the path is to become a teacher, but I shouldn't say a lot, probably 5% will come in and say, hey, I was thinking about maybe becoming a counselor in high school or K-12 or higher ed. Um, the only experience I know I can base it off of is my experience, like seeing them in K-12 or whatever the case. But I know for in higher ed, a counselor is a different kind of um, definition than like a counselor in high school or like an advisor at a university. So can you kind of like give us a sense of what you, besides the instructor part, but what you would do, like how many students you meet, what do you talk to them about, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that definitely. So when it comes to special population, and what I mean by that is individuals who might be first generation college student, individuals who might be a part of like a marginalized group, disenfranchised group, uh, who might have some academic, um, they need to work on their academics a little bit. Um, that's how I define special populations. That's what I tend to work with, and that's what EOP&S basically works with, is individuals who are first generation college students with come from a low socioeconomic background, or part of the disenfranchised groups or marginalized groups, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans. And so basically, where we differ from all those different groups you were talking about is that we focus on an academic plan to give them guidance, right? Traditionally or historically, students were just taking classes that they really didn't need to take.
Right.
All of a sudden, it comes to graduating, at the community college, you only need 60 units. Well, these individuals had like 85, right? And they're wasting all this time.
That was me.
And, time is money.
Yeah.
So they formulated a plan and say, okay, well, let's bring in some experts who are highly trained in this regard so we can get them in and out as quickly as possible so they can continue on with their venture. Well, that's where the counselor comes in. He kind of lays out, or she lays out, this academic plan saying, okay, these are the particular classes that you need to take in order to get your degree, which becomes a little convoluted at times because you have, certain students who will be like, yo, I want to be a nurse, right? They come in, they want to be a nurse. All of a sudden they change, 2 months later, now they want to be a history teacher. Then they want to come back and they want to, be like fireman, right? So on average, students change their majors 3 times within the course of their academic career, right? So we kind of say, okay, lay out a plan, let them know exactly what they need to do in order to kind of stay somewhat on the path, and then ask those hard questions, right? Like, why do you keep changing your major? You want to be a nurse, now all of a sudden you want to be a history teacher. Like, why? What's going on? Because sometimes students need to learn how to be students, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
If they don't, not all the time, but quite a few, they become lost or kind of waste a lot of time. And so we try to help them to stay on path. But you talked about this idea of having an advisor. An academic advisor would be like, it's straight to classes. This is what you should take, especially the degree that you're trying to earn, especially with the type of job you're trying to, career you're trying to have. And they just stick to just that. They don't talk about the hard questions like what's going on at home, why are you deciding to change your major. They're just like, tell me what you want to do, and I'm lay out the plan for you. So it's not all warm and fuzzy, like with counselors. Counselors tend to be a little bit more warm and fuzzy. But then the difference between a personal counselor and an academic counselor is that the personal counselor just focuses on the individual. What we try to do is we try to focus on the individual and the academics. So we're a blend of advisor and the personal counsel, right? Without trying to duplicate services, because you don't want to do that. If it gets too hectic, where it's too personal, then what we'll do is we'll listen, of course, let them know we're mandated reporters, and then refer them to personal counseling. But that's if in a perfect world, we have a perfect academic counselors, because some of us have run into some academic counselors that should be advisors or should be personal counselors. So,
or shouldn't be in education.
Or anything, yeah, should be a garbage man or something. You know what I mean?
Right.
For real, yeah.
So you reminded me of so I want to ask you, I think you and I kind of fall in the same line, but the research I'm doing is on transfer students, right? So from the community college to university, and how can we help students graduate, be more successful, basically persist, graduate, that kind of thing. And one of the articles I read, I remember the title, something like a handhold for a little bit. And so what the summary of it is, at the junior college, the community college, there's more of that, like you're talking about, the counselor who's talking about academics, but they're also holding the hand a little bit, like what's going on. And unfortunately, that sounds a little bit, because of our society, a little bit less than like hold their hand, but I think those are important things, right? The nurturing aspect. And then what they're saying is when they transfer over to the university, you have more of what you're talking about, right? This advisor that I'm going to tell you what class you need to take and get you out of here. I tend to fall at the university when I advise more of like that counselor at a community college, where I'm worried about the whole person and their academics. And so I guess my question is, moving that transition from the community college where you're having that more holistic approach to helping students, and then they get to a university where there's a tendency for more of that detached academic approach? How do you think that the counselors at the community college should be holding their hand less, or do you think that the university should be holding their hand more? I guess.
I think it's on a case-by-case basis. But theoretically, what you're talking about is when the student gets to the university, two things. Either they've, even before they, let's say they never went to a community college, they went directly to a university, they were properly trained on how to operate in that UC or that CSU system. Mm-hmm. Normally, when you have individuals who go to community college, there's idea, it could be false, that they're not ready quite yet to go to a university, but that's not technically true. Sometimes there are students who go to a community college because, you know, their parents are paying for it and need to save money, which makes total sense. But the population that we're pretty much talking about, it tends to at the community college where individuals need to learn how to be college students, right? And unfortunately, when individuals go to the university, straight to the university, they might not be quite ready. Right. So they might need a little bit more of the hand holding. And when you say that, I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea, because I kind of see it as individuals who's blind and trying to, or asleep and trying to be awakened.
Right.
And so the hand holding is definitely a good idea, especially if there's obstacles in the way that could help it or cause this person to stumble. So, but we cannot assume, and I think that's the best way to go about it, is we cannot assume that anybody is in any certain position, regardless of their background or level of education, that they are not equipped to, you know, make it at the community college or the college level. We just have to ask those hard questions of why they're there, what they're trying to accomplish, and go from there. Because if I was to say, well, we need less hand holding at the universities and more at the community college, or vice versa, well, number one, it could be biased, and number two, obviously it could be inaccurate. And I think that's the reason why a lot of times people fall through the crack at any level, is because there's this universal approach when dealing with students at certain levels. And I think people have to understand that we're dealing with humans, and there's a lot of human error that's attached to it. So let's have those conversations. Let's talk to these individuals, because obviously students and people in general have a lot to offer, and at times they need sometimes that person to drag that out of them, or let them know, be aware that they have something to offer. So if you're just being an advisor at a person at the university, and they don't technically know how to operate in the college, university system, they might fall through the cracks.
Right. That's, so you bring up a good point that I wanted to kind of come back to earlier when you said it sounded like the average was students at a community college change their major 3 times. So the question is, your students are doing that, so that 3 times to change their major. You're also pointing out, which I agree with wholeheartedly, that students need to learn how to learn. And this idea of looking at students on an individual basis, instead of saying like, well, when they're in community college, they need this, when they're in the university, they need this, when, you know, maybe that 75% in the community college need this or whatever. But looking at it more of a specific, here's the student in front of me, what does this student need specifically? Not, well, they're at a university and they have these demographics, so this is who they are as a person. You need to actually take the time to get to know them. So I guess my question is, and I'm asking it because I want to answer it in the way what I expect you to say too, what I'm thinking. But why do you think students are changing their majors so often? Why do you think they need to learn how to learn? And why do you think that we're not having those individual conversations with students and we're generalizing things?
You know, so students are learning more about themselves. When you think of education, you have to understand that you have to learn how to die. And people are like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't, that's not what I'm saying. When you're educated, your world opens up and ignorance starts to die, right? Prejudice starts to die. The education is more than just schooling. Education and schooling are 2 different things. And a lot of times we associate higher education with schooling. But we have to understand that that person is to grow. And in order for something to grow, at times things have to die. There's dead things that need to fall off as individuals for this person to prosper and to grow. So a lot of that is happening when they're changing their majors. They're finding out different things about them. And let's face it, most of us who, go into a major to, have a certain career is off of a referral, right? Well, my aunt was a nurse, right? My grandfather was a teacher. You know, my dad was a police officer, and they realized that's not for them. Or, you know, a friend, oh, let's go be cops. You know, that's something like myself. When I was younger, I wanted to be a police officer. My friend was like, yo, let's be cops, right? And I was like, all right, let's do it. Well, he didn't go through with it, and I did. I graduated the academy and all that other stuff, but I realized it wasn't for me, right? So that's an example. And so it's we have to be patient in this whole process as educators or individuals who are stakeholders with students, because they're there to learn more about themselves. They don't have everything figured out. We're there to kind of show them the ropes and help guide them, or even in a sense, hold their hand along the way until they can figure it out. Because there's going to be a lot of obstacles, and sometimes it's self-inflicted obstacles, right? And so when people take on this universal approach of thinking that they have it all figured out, that's how you lose your retention rate, right? Retention rate meaning people who actually stay in the college. That's how you lose your transfer rate from the community college to higher, you know, the universities. Students don't have it all figured out and might not have this certain type of resiliency in them, right? Life becomes too convoluted or too hard, so they stop. But how do we go about it? Is that the third part of your question?
Yeah. So how can we, and that's, I'll add to that a little bit, because I'm kind of building off that. What you were saying with this question is, coming from a faculty, an educator's perspective, I'm completely in agreement with you, but at the same time, there's this like fine balance that I feel like I need to walk, where I tend to be more of the handhold, right? Like I want to nurture you, want to comfort you, I want to make sure everything okay. But I also know that in my life, there was a lot of individuals like that who helped, you know, me grow. But there's also individuals who weren't the, oh, come here, like I'm going to take care of it. They were the individuals who said, you know, get your act together. And, you know, one individual, I won't go into the whole story, but a person who was very important in my life kicked me out of his house because I wasn't understanding what he was trying to say. And that was a really devastating thing for me, but I grew, and we figured it out and we reconciled, but I grew a lot because of that. And so I guess my question is, from the faculty perspective, how do we, and you don't need to try to answer this, I can't at this point either, but how do we walk that fine line of this person right now needs nurturing and this person right now needs me to kick him out of my house?
Okay, yeah, I got you. Yeah. So I remember now. So one of the things is, the reason why we kind of have this universal approach is because we don't have enough time in the day to sit there and do the one-on-one, right? If, for example, you might have over 200 students total, right, from all your different classes. And we come in, let's back up, we come in with this idea that we're warm and fuzzy, but as time and experience goes on, certain things and experiences cause us to be a little dated at times and more realistic, right? I don't have enough time. Like, I'm just trying to get through this. And so it's being cognizant of that, being cognizant that you might have students who are, you know what, they can just go with the flow and they don't need as much attention, right? Because that might even be annoying to some students who haven't figured out, have everything going well, and they don't need the extra hand holding. But then there's those few who might need that. So then you concentrate on those few, because as an instructor or teacher, we're only as good as our weakest link. And what I mean by that is the student who's not doing as well. If we can reach that particular student, man, we can reach anybody. And that's how we can kind of gauge if we're a proper instructor. But then at the same time, I agree with you of kicking them out of the house, and how I associate that statement with is this idea that there has to be accountability on the student's part. And I think a lot of times, if you're growing, you have to do an honest self-assessment of your abilities and the things that you need improvement on. I don't like to say weaknesses, I like to say improvements. Because as a student, you have to be humble and understand that you're going to have weaknesses, aka things you need to improve on. But you have to be accountable. You have to be honest with yourself. So if you're not a great writer and you're in an English class and someone is, trying to help you and hold your hand, you need extra help, keep in mind that instructor, that professor might not have the time to give you as much one-on-one as you would like. So go to the writing center, ask for help. Because at the end of the day, you're going to pick it up and you can pass that knowledge forward. But you have to do your part too as a student, because we put too much pressure at times on the professors, the instructors, and at times it's warranted and at times it's not. We have to be realistic. We have to have honest dialogue like you and I are doing right now to address these issues. And sometimes we have to bring up hard points.
Mm-hmm.
And at times, students have to understand that they are responsible for their own academic oppressions or academic shortcomings. They can't just, I mean, that's just giving someone way too much power, right? To say it's all on you on how much writing or English I'm going to learn. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's like, wait, whoa. Come on, you know? I don't, at this point, I don't even want to teach you. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
I'm afraid of someone else. I'm just joking. But, the student has to understand that it is, when I think of the relationship or education, it's a collaborative effort. In order for it to be collaborative, everybody has to do their part and
Mhm.
everybody has to contribute, right? So you have responsibility as an instructor, you have responsibility as a student. And if you're not doing either one of those are not doing their part, then it's a failed arrangement and the whole system or individuals a part of it are going to suffer.
Right. You bring up a ton of good points. I'll try to finish with the one I think is most important. But um, what you just mentioned about well, I see. I shouldn't say a lot of students, but I think there's a tendency for students, and I don't think it's. I don't want to. I don't think it's their fault completely, but obviously there's some accountability there. But I think there's a system, and again, I'm not trying to beat up on K-12 teachers. I think they get enough of that as it is, and they do a tremendous job as well. But they're in a system that's difficult to work through too. But I think there's a system that's kind of developed because of the need for efficiency and speed and having so many students that they tend to develop passive students coming out of high school. So when I'm here like almost like a customer, and you need to do for me. Otherwise, and then you start seeing with like rate my professor and the even feedback and stuff, evaluations. There's this idea of like you better do everything I need, otherwise I'm gonna give you a bad feedback or a bad rating or whatever. It's almost like going to Lowe's or somewhere. I want good customer service, otherwise I'm gonna tell your manager on you or whatever the case. And that combined with kind of this passive mindset that's been um, kind of pushed on them just through doing this over and over and over, this repetition, has a tendency to, if I don't learn something, it's because of you. And rather than if I don't learn something, it's partly because of you, but also I have some accountability. What can I be doing? And the example I usually go back to is when I was doing my MA, and I've told my students this, but when I was in my MA, I had a professor tell me that I wasn't combining sentences properly. And I'm in a writing, master's program. And so I knew that professor was busy and a lot of stuff going on. So I just started looking up on Google, and it says like 0.023 seconds gives you 150,000 results on how to combine sentences properly. So I just went through and taught myself how to do that, and I understood it. And so I think it's frustrating for me at times when I hear a student say, well, no one's ever taught me how to use blank, or to do blank. And that to me sounds very, I've been here floating around and no one's given me this yet, rather than I'm here trying to get the most out of things and I'm going to go find out how to do these things and ask questions, or, it seems like all the information in the world is at our fingertips.
Right.
And we have a tendency to be like, nope, it needs to find me somehow in my day. For example, changing the brakes in my truck. No one taught me how to do that, but I can go on YouTube and I can look it up, and, or building a fence. I just finished building a fence today. I'll be done with it. And yeah, I've had some guidance from my dad, but I know how to go find that information. And I think that goes back to learning how to learn and understanding those things, and being active. And again, I don't think it's students' fault, but I think they've been pushed through this constant passive state that it's really tough to break out of that. The other thing I think the more important thing that you brought up was the idea of self-awareness. And that goes for students and for faculty or anybody in general. I think that's one of the biggest things that, and I'm still learning it, but like Dr. Stephanie Patterson, this idea of reflecting on your day, on the events that just transpired, what you're doing, how you're going about it, your conversations. I think that's a really important tool and strategy and skill. And I don't think it's taught. The things that are taught are, who is this Greek god? How much, how do you do this math problem? And I think teaching those while not teaching the other is harmful to students rather than helping them out.
Absolutely, 100%. And so, just to kind of answer your question, it goes back to this idea that people want to put the blame somewhere of their own shortcomings. And that could be from a student's point of view or even from a professor or instructor's point of view. Because sometimes, let's just face it, you got some shitty professors out there. You know what I mean? Like, you got some cats out there who shouldn't be, professors. And I hate to say it, sometimes you got some students who, they're still learning how to be students. You know what I mean? And because I can't sit there and say no one should be a student, because that's not accurate. Right. You're just a student in life. So, but there has to be accountability on both parts, and that's kind of the recurring theme, right? Accountability. And there's some responsibility of both ends, because there are, let's just face it, teachers are humans and so are students. Right. So there are biases and prejudice that professors or instructors have. They have a certain idea of what the model student is or what the epitome of a student is, right? So there's an individual who comes in who might be on the fence of not doing well academically or doing well, and they think this person shouldn't do well. Could be the driving force of why that person is no longer a student or a good student. I was thinking about this individual by the name of Malcolm Little, who was one of the best students up to the 6th grade. He was African American, of course, and went to his teacher and said, "Yo, I want to be a lawyer." And she told him, because this was, back in the day, but I have to argue at times that this might even still be relevant today. The teacher told him, said, "No, you should be a carpenter." Well, that conversation changed his whole point of view and how he saw the world and education, and he became a criminal, right? And then went to prison, and then he went to the Nation of Islam and became Malcolm X, right? So that little encounter from that instructor or that teacher changed the whole course of this individual's life, which impacted the world. So we have to continue to remind ourselves as educators that we will impact individuals on a level that we can never imagine from a simple conversation or simple comment or even a grade. That's a lot of power. That's why I always thought that teachers and instructors should be paid more than what they're given, because when you think about it from that point of view, it's like, damn, like, I should be a millionaire. I'm changing people's lives. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
At the same time, you have students who are saying, you know what? I don't want to grow. I don't want to be educated. I want to be schooled, right? Tell me, what 2 + 3 is. Right. Not the philosophy behind 2 + 3 = 5. And that's the direction that education is going into, because like you said before, this idea of being efficient, right? Lack of time, so many students, you have classrooms being overpopulated, and so it's like, okay, I'm just going to tell you what the equation is, and I'm going to tell you, what the solution is, and that's it. We're going to move on, right? And so that's the K through 12. And they've been schooled this since kindergarten all the way to the 12th grade, right? Just tell me what it is. I'll solve it. I'll keep moving. Right. And all of a sudden now we inherit this schooled individual who has to be a part of this higher educational system, trying to educate himself, that doesn't know how to do that because of how they've been schooled, right? Since they were 4 or 5 years old. And we have to unravel that. We have to undo that. And at times it's hard for people to do what we talked about, this
the awareness,
the self-monitoring, right? Because it lets them know of their shortcomings. A lot of times people have a lot of pride attached to their learning, and they'll want to say, yo, there's nothing wrong with me. There's something wrong with your teaching style, right? And so when people are looking at themselves, they have to honestly be taught how to do that and why that's important. Because if you're looking at education from collaborative effort, it's not only the student who fails or suffers, it's also the educator who suffers. It's also the institution and our society that suffers.
It's interesting that I always kind of view it from the faculty perspective of how you have the teachers who are the ones who want to do that holistic approach, and then you also have the teachers who are to say, it's from Rita Pearson's video, but this idea of like, they don't pay me to like the kids, they pay me to teach them. That's what they should do and move on. What's funny though, I always view it from that faculty perspective, obviously, but you have that with students too, right? Like you have the students who no, I need you to know about me. I'm one of those students. I want you to know about me, and that helps me connect with you. But there's also students who you may think that you're doing this holistic approach that's beneficial, and maybe sitting back there thinking like, just tell me what you want me to do, and let's move on with life.
Right.
And so it goes back to what you were saying earlier, this individual basis and the complexity of education, and why I think a lot of times it's not being done well, because even if you're that person who really cares, is studying and researching, is getting to know, you're trying to figure it out. Everything's so complex, and they have other things going on, and you have other things going on. We're human beings. Like it seems pretty crazy to think about it that way, and then realize sometimes things do go right, and people are successful. One of the things you mentioned a little while ago, but I thought it was really interesting. I hope that we can talk about it a little bit. Is self-inflicted obstacles. I think that's one of the biggest, along with self-awareness. I think this idea of self-inflicted obstacles is such a huge thing that happens. I told Annie when I teach, one of the things I noticed that students don't fail a course because of the content. It's usually always something else going on, or something that you can see it, like you can see, let me just help you through it. But they're not at that age yet where they can hear that or even want to hear it. And so I was wondering if you could talk about things that you've seen as far as these self-inflicted obstacles that get in students' way, or that they actually put in their own way.
Well, I would have to say, obviously that's a individual basis. So some of the examples that I can think of are where students don't understand that their primary hustle being a student is not working 40 hours a week, is being a student, right? And it's better to suffer now than have to suffer your entire life. So go to school, work the part-time job, max 20 hours a week. Don't try to be full-time and try to go to school. So unfortunately, a lot of times people have to do that because they have family to support. I totally understand that. But if you could sacrifice just a little bit for your betterment in the long run, then do so. But it's the working the so many hours. It's trying to start families. And I don't knock that. I mean, you take kids however you can get them. I get it, totally understand. But that could be a self-inflicted obstacle. And it could be, abuse of drugs and alcohol. That's another self-inflicted. You also could lack of dedication to schooling, not studying properly, not preparing for the test, and then the most important thing is putting your shortcomings on everybody else but yourself. You know what I mean? Like, you have to take accountability for your own life, because life don't give a shit about you. It's going to keep moving regardless. So it's how you want to go about your life. And a lot of times people think it's everybody else's fault, but when you die and it's over, it's going to keep pushing. Like, it is what it is. And so when people look at it from that point of view, then they'll take more accountability and say, you know what, I have the power in my hands. So let me do this, and let me stop putting these self-inflicted, obstacles in front of me. But at the same time, I have to admit, some obstacles that are put in front of individuals, especially the population that I talked about earlier, individuals who are marginalized, disenfranchised, they have obstacles that they do not have no choice but to deal with. And they need individuals to help them with it. And, so I can't sit there and say that 100% of students have their own, self-inflicted obstacles. I know that's not what you're saying either.
Right.
But I'm bringing it up because I think this is a good time to kind of talk about it a little bit. I mean, we could do a whole segment just on that alone, part 2, part 3, part 4, you know what I mean? But the point is that we as educators have to be aware of that. We have to understand the difference between self-inflicted obstacles and societal inflicted obstacles, right? Or oppression is what we so normally refer it to. And be able to differentiate between the two, because individuals who are oppressed could be hypersensitive, right? Not understanding that this is not a societal oppressive move. It's more self-inflicted. You know what I mean? Nobody told you to have 17 kids without an education.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, nobody told you not to study and go to the party of the club, you know what I mean? Because you're trying to keep up with the Joneses to be cool. That's all on you. But lack of opportunity, lack of help based on how you look or how you sound, that's something different.
Yeah. So I'd like to, I think we're in a good spot to start segueing over, but to this idea of race and gender and that kind of thing. But the other thing before we go into there, when you were talking just now, before you said shortcomings, I started writing down ego, and you mentioned that already. But there's one of the biggest shortcomings, I think. I think it has to do with this, but I noticed it, especially with writing, because it is such a personal thing to do, to share your writing with somebody or share the weaknesses, the areas of improvement for you as a writer. And I mean, to be completely honest, I'm doing it, as I'm saying this, I'm doing it with Montero, who's my chair right now for the dissertation. Like, I'm very, like, when she gives me feedback, all the 2% that's positive, it's like I cling to that, and the rest of it where it's critical, it's like your ego gets in the way, right? Where it's like, and so it's understanding that separation of, you need to let that kind of go away so that you can improve as a person and as a writer. But I noticed with students who tend to struggle with writing, not all of them, but there is this kind of trend that when I sit with them one-to-one to talk about their writing, there's this tendency, the more insecure they are about their writing, the more they'll try to talk over you. And, oh, yeah, I know. And they don't listen. And it just happened recently with my mom, and she may watch this, and I love my mom, but she's going to school right now and trying to finish her AA. And so she gave me one of her papers to look at. We were doing like a Zoom call like this. And as I'm trying to explain something, you can hear it ramping up, like, oh yeah, okay, oh yeah, I got it. And instead of stopping and just listening to what's being said, I think that's that insecurity showing, that let me pretend that I know, so that, because if I don't, and I admit to that not knowing, it may be a weakness seen in me, or I may look inferior or in a negative light. And again, I don't think that's all the students' fault either, especially when it comes to writing. I hear so many awful stories from my students who've had former writing teachers who have made rude remarks, have just really these negative experiences of, you can't write, you should go do this, kind of like what you're saying earlier. How come you still don't get this? Or giving them feedback that doesn't have any substance to it, that just says, like, here, put the comment here, and doesn't explain like why a comment goes there or whatever. And so there is that, like, going back to what you're saying, it's a twofold, right? It's, I need to be accountable for what's going on in my actions, but I also need to understand that these things that have been happening to me have had an effect on me as well. So I think that's a great point. It's something I see in my own teaching with students, and myself as a student writing right now.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I've always said is that grading is very subjective.
Mm-hmm.
I've always believed that writing is very subjective. Now, there's some things that are just blatant, like you need a comma there, you need a period there, you need a question mark there, right? It's just the way it is. But the content is very subjective. When it comes to individuals being very defensive,
mm-hmm.
we have to understand the status that an educator has, right? It's almost like this power over the student, right? And it's almost like being rebellious in a sense, or like, I'm still a human being.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you control my grade, but I can control how I go about things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where the ego comes in, and it's not accurate. I think at times students should be able to take the information and process it and say, what helps me to be a better person? Because remember, we're talking the difference between being schooled and being educated, right? Growing. Sometimes you have an individual who learned the most, even though he got a C in the class, and you have a person who got an A who learned jack shit, right? But it's this position that the instructor has on the student that the student thinks about, right?
Mm-hmm.
This person is a position of power, right? I don't like it. I don't like for this person to have this much power over me. So when they give their recommendations, and they be coming from a good place, not a malice place at all, I'm gonna let you know that you don't have that power over me, or not as much as you think.
Right.
So yeah, I get it. I understand. Yeah. And at the same time, I've been writing my whole entire life.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm older than you. You know what I mean? How you gonna tell me how to write?
Right.
I raised you. You know what I'm saying? That kind of thing, right? So we we have to be aware of that on both sides and take it for what it is, and understand, and even ask ourselves as educators, are we being too critical? Right? Like you said, 2.3 seconds, it pulls up 100 million ways, different ways to construct a
Right.
sentence. Is it because the way that we were taught, and we holding that over everything, every other possibility? Are we being reasonable? Right? Because if you give a suggestion, I think this is where the ego comes in from the instructor. You give a suggestion and they shoot it down, and all of a sudden our ego is hurt.
Uh-huh.
Like, what are you talking about? Like, I gave you that. I'm the teacher. I know what I'm talking about. I got an MA in English. I got a, you know what I mean? I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But we should put our ego aside as educators and say, our way is not the absolute way.
Yeah. So you brought up a lot of good points there too.
Might be part two, bro. We
I know, I
might do a
know,
part two, man.
but
There's
it
a lot
is
of
it's
good
such,
stuff that we're covering right now, you know?
yeah, and I think the same thing where it goes back to this idea of when I was talking about noticing just the fact that you notice a student doing the and kind of that kind of thing. That goes back to the self-perception, self-awareness, that you are able to step outside of just this direct instruction and see this and hear that inner voice of something else that's going on too, and be like, okay, I know I'm trying to point out a comma, but why am I feeling this energy from this student at this time? And how am I going to, like, how am I feeling about that, and how am I approaching it now because I'm feeling that? And so just that alone, and that's just one thing, but like the complexity of that alone. The other thing that ties into that is the culture too. There's certain cultures, when you're talking about authority and power, certain cultures look at that differently, and certain cultures look at and again on an individual basis, but generally speaking, in some cultures, there's a when you talk about a teacher, that's the authority figure. You listen to what the teacher says, whereas other cultures may be taught, individuals in that culture may be taught question, right? That just because that person's up there doesn't mean that they're the say all be all. Question what they're saying and ask them. Whereas somebody else would hear that and say, no, I'm not questioning anything. Whatever he or she says, that's the gospel. And so, again, I think what we're not even intentionally getting at for this whole discussion is this complexity of education, and how much more important it is to understand the whole rather than trying to drive home definitions and this memorization kind of thing.
Absolutely, because when we look at education, it is convoluted.
Mm-hmm.
Because what's a part of education? Human beings.
Right.
So you have this human error that's attached to it. And so if you look at being schooled, that could be traditional way of going about things, universal way. But when you look at education, the definition of education of people growing from a holistic approach, there's so many different facets to it. Right? It'll blow your mind if you really looked at and dissected the word education,
right,
what it really represents. And I think we don't have enough time to do that.
Right.
We have too many students to focus on, and we tend to do this more of schooling, not educating. And so when you understand, the point is though, is to understand your student population, right? Understand that they can think independently and they come from different backgrounds that shape the way that they go about the world, right? Let's add to it. Let's not break it down, and dissect it and make it obsolete or, ostracize these individuals, but let's build upon that. We know that that's a possibility of how they can come back,
Right.
but this is similar. This idea of them having to assimilate to our learning style, you're going to miss a lot of
Right.
students. You're not going to be an effective educator. You have to understand that there's different learning styles. There's a different way that you have to go about it. The traditional way is not working because you have more and more individuals who are being a part of this educational system that understand that Eurocentric ways and beliefs are not the universal way to go about for everybody.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's different ways of learning. There's different ways of teaching. And so we can't control the student. We can only control ourselves as educators and as instructors. And And sometimes most of the times we have to actually show them how to be students. And I talked about this earlier. How do we do that? How do we understand that there's ways that the student can improve or build on their way of thinking, or even break down and have some of their illogical ways of thinking die? Because that's what education is about. Some things have to die for that person to grow. How do we do that in a way that'll reach to them so they want to learn on their own, so they'll buy into what we're trying to teach them, or ask questions when they need to, regardless of what culture they come from? Because of just because traditionally Hispanic students don't ask questions, right? It's kind of go with the flow. We need to, at times, regardless of if they're Hispanic or not, black, white, question the establishment in a very diplomatic, respectful manner, to make sure that they're getting all the different elements that they need for them to be educated at school.
That's so two things, and then we'll move on to that last kind of topic we want to talk about. But this idea of, to me, my answer to that so far, and feels like it's been a year, but I think I've been teaching now for 6 years, and where I can point to for me is the safety, is making sure that I develop those relationships with students so they feel safe to let me know, here's why I don't talk in class, or here's why I'm doing this, or here's because if you don't set that up, in my opinion, if you don't set that up, then it's like you're never going to find those, probably not going to be able to find those things out. And the other thing I was going to mention was, it almost feels like the reason we see so much schooling is, and you see, and I experienced as an undergrad, and you have these teachers or professors who give you the syllabus, here's exactly what we're doing, this is what I'm going to tell you, you're going to sit there and listen, is because it probably is, it's a safer spot to be, and I can get everything done that I'm supposed to get done. I can show my supervisor, my authority, I did everything. Students can't say anything because I showed them the syllabus, this is what we got done, I stuck to my guns. And so by doing that, make it very black and white, it ends up being safer rather than getting into the complexities of things. And that's when you start getting uncomfortable, insecure, dangerous. And so let's just push away from that. Even though we might know as educators, both you and I know, but even though they might be thinking, I should be doing these things a little bit differently, let me just stay in my comfort zone and do my 25 years or whatever it is and call it good.
But then it's like, if we're doing that, then how can we expect our students to get out of their comfort zone?
Right. Well, that's the thing. That's what's so funny to me is, especially when I try to talk to my lib studies students about this, since they're going to education, there's this weird game that I feel like we play where I'm going to come in as a teacher, you pretend to care about what I'm talking about, talk to me during class, you do the assignments, whether you actually agree. One of my students talked about how she figured out in a writing class at a JC, she figured out what the teacher liked politically and that kind of thing, and just started writing her paper. She was struggling, and then she started writing her papers to make that professor feel good, and started doing well in the class. And so what we're learning, and I don't think teachers are that aware of it, is forget about this game where surface level feels good and start getting into what's actually happening. What do you need from me? What am I not doing well enough for you? What are you not doing well enough for me? And let's actually grow in these 16 weeks rather than 16 weeks are over with and it's like, all right, that's out of my life and I'll never remember that again. That's a tough thing to do in the system right now because it is too busy and too much stuff's going on.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, we don't have enough time, right? However, it's like, how do we empower our students, right, to be a part of this class regardless? It doesn't always have to be vocal.
Right?
How do we empower them so they're engaged? They want to be engaged. And there's no set way how to do that. Even though we are in the higher educational system bounded by our syllabus, there's still ways where we could still ask the students what they want to learn to incorporate that into our syllabus. So we're still covering the SLOs, right? Student learning outcomes. And I've done it before and I know the system works, but what we have to face is this idea where instructors get comfortable, teachers get comfortable, and this has worked for the last 25 years.
Right.
I'm set in my ways and this is how I want to do it. And
students are comfortable.
Right.
And so it's that combination of those things I've been doing this for 12 years in K-12. You've been doing this 25 years or whatever the case. We're both comfortable. Let's just be comfortable together and get through
That's
this.
it.
I apologize for interrupting.
No, it's good, but that leads into my next point. So then you develop this student who's being schooled but not prepared for the real world. He's not prepared because he's not used to critical thinking. That's a part of education. Being schooled is something that the teachers and instructors have developed based on their comfortability. You got to get out of your comfort zone. You got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And because of their comfortability, we're producing these students, and that's the reason why I don't even know where we're at in the world as far as education now, which is ridiculous, because people are not rolling with the times. You know, you're still teaching the baby boomer method to Generation Z. Right. And so it's not working. I mean, I literally, when I was a substitute teacher for Modesto City Schools back in the day,
you and me both.
Right? Casper, I would try to break down theories and different problems in math, and they were like, yo, just give me the answer.
Worksheet.
That was it. And so it made me think. I was just like, wow, and where do you want to go to college? Because they were going to college.
Right.
And I was like, oh man, it's crazy. And so what the teacher that their instructor has to do at the next level kind of follow suit with the K through 12 has already done. Because they do want the good remarks. They want the good evals from the students, because let's keep it 100. Like, everyone's trying to feed their families.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like, yo, like, I'm going to try to do what I can to get a good eval for the most part. And hopefully they learn something along the way. But at the end of the day, it's how I'm going to feed my family.
Right.
But the thing about it is we came in this for a good reason, but we stay in it for another, which is the check. You know what I mean? And it's minimal at that, but it's still a check. And it's sad but it's reality. Over time, because of maybe the system or the students, our own thoughts, we become jaded and we stop teaching for the reason why we got into it. And that's the problem. We have to show students how to be students.
One of the things you brought up that made me kind of think of was, there's certain things I want students to learn, whether it's a writing class or an introduction class. Like, I think obviously you teach the content, but the most important thing to me about being a liberal studies professor is teaching them to learn and to be self-aware. And so when they become a teacher, they know that even though everybody's going to want to be speeding you up, even though you have all these different obligations, and even though, you know, some of these negative things are taking place, the most important thing is sorry, my dog's gonna start barking. There's a UPS. The most important thing is for you to slow down and really think about what you're doing and reflect on what's going on. And I think it's now, being 5-6 years in, I'm starting to have former students who are teachers now in K-12. And every time I hear from one of them, I kind of get a little gun shy, because I'm hoping that what I hear is that positive, excited person who's slowing things down and building relationships and making sure their students are in a good spot. But I'm always worried that, am I going to hear a student who says, they're almost done. Can you hear them?
Yeah. Sounds like Cujo, man.
Yeah, they let them know that they're the boss around here. I'm always concerned that I'm gonna have a student who, even though they went through all that, and they get jaded, like you're saying, by all the stuff that's going on, and then they fall into that same mold of, I'm gonna go to the staff room and complain about my students, complain about the parents, complain about my admin, rather than shifting it to, listen, I can feel myself getting jaded. I can feel myself getting frustrated with what's going on. Let me go back to my foundation, which is knowing how to learn and how to be a better person and to slow things down.
Absolutely.
And if that took, like, that's the thing that's probably most exciting to me, is like hearing that from finding out a former student is teaching and they figured that out. And it's fun. You can see them right now, and they're developing as teachers right now. They're out there doing it. It's so cool to see. But I think that's one of my biggest fears, is someone who's teaching future teachers, is to help to produce teachers who are jaded, or is that like, I would hate to hear that one of my former students is the one in the break room who's the leading all the complaining and this sucks and this and this and this, and not reaching out to parents and not building community and stuff. That would just drive you up a wall. So I think those are important things. One of the things we talked about was wanting to make sure we talked about race and gender. And I know that we're over an hour. I think we're over an hour now. And I don't want to, I'm going to ask you what you want to do, but I don't want to not give it its justice, right? Like, I don't want to like, oh, let's try to do 5 minutes real quick on race and gender. So would you rather kind of talk about it briefly, or would you rather touch on it real quick and then plan for a part 2 where we're just talking about race and gender?
Yeah, we could do a part 2. I mean, it's whatever your viewer. I mean, do you have feedback from your viewers? Can you read some of their responses?
I can do that on the comments.
Yeah, I mean, see what they want to do. You know what I mean? Because
Okay.
I can touch on it briefly, and if they want to hear part 2, what I have to say, which typically doesn't go with what the status quo says, then I'll do it. If not, it's all good. But I know that everything that we're talking about is very important, regardless if it's race or not. This approach, education in itself, and having these conversations are very important. I want to say I applaud your effort, right? Because you could see the difference between an instructor and an educator, right? You could see how dedicated you are, not to your profession, but to the students. And I applaud you, because I put it like this, you know, if I had a kid, which I do, who goes to Stan State, and he was in your class, I would have nothing to worry about. You know what I mean? So, you know, keep doing your thing, man. But
I appreciate it. That's a huge compliment, honestly. Like,
yeah, and I've worked with you before, you know what I mean, and we've been in the doctor program and stuff like that together. And I've always thought highly of how you went about education. There was others I was questioned, but you, for real. So keep doing your thing, man. But what's your questions?
So I don't know if it's a question so much as just having the conversation about it. So, and I think what you were saying, maybe tease it a little bit and then see what people think. But I'm in a frustrated spot because, like I said, I'm doing the research right now, specifically on transfer students. And I kind of knew this going into it, but every single thing that I look at that has to do with demographics and statistics, it's almost like I don't even need to turn the page to the next thing. I already know what it's going to show, right? It's going to show white students here, and then you're going to have Hispanic and Black African-American students here. And it drives me up a wall. And the other thing we were talking about was earlier was this idea of students who are attending now, how it's shifted from, used to be male students at a higher enrollment and then female students. And now that's flipped to where female students are much higher, usually about, just in general, but usually about 5% going to higher ed currently. My issue with it is, and this sounds really bad coming from a white male, but like when the female population was lower in the enrollment, you heard a lot of discussion about, okay, we need to make this more equal and that kind of thing. And then now that it's flipped, I didn't even realize it until I started doing the research, and I saw that because there's not, and again, maybe I haven't heard it in my bubble, but there's not a conversation taking place about how come males aren't going to school. And I'm sure there is. I shouldn't say there's not, but it just isn't as prevalent to me. And even to the point where in my dissertation with Dr. Montero, I wrote that I think it was like 45 and 55. So 55% is female population in higher ed, 45 is male. And so I put in the comment to her, so I'll put this in here as the number, but there's obviously no concern, like there's no drastic issue going on. And she wrote back, absolutely there's an issue going on, right? It's just, you don't think it's an issue because it's not the status quo of what an issue should be. It's the females are on top. And so I think it's an important thing to discuss, both the gender and race, but it's something that people don't want to talk about because it's difficult to talk about.
Yeah. And so kind of picking up what you're saying, you made a lot of good points on a lot of different levels. I think absolutely you should be the one talking about as a white male. I think sometimes, a lot of times, we get caught up in this idea that only certain groups should talk about it.
Right.
But we have to understand that we live in a society that is comprised of all different cultures, right? White, black, Mexican. And if you look at the system, historically, who are the individuals who are running it, right?
Hmm.
White males.
Right.
So absolutely, you should be the number one person talking about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there's this, first of all, I think with it's a regional issue.
Right.
You know, the different parts of the United States, those numbers will obviously be different,
Right.
because when you said, whites here, Mexicans here, Latino here, and black here, we're forgetting about Asian Americans, right?
Hmm.
There's regions where it's Asian Americans,
Right.
whites,
Right.
so it's a regional thing. But since you're doing a lot of your research on this region, you're trying to tackle this particular problem, we have to make it normal for other groups outside of the white Americans of being educated.
Right.
That's the normalcy. Everybody, all Americans should be college educated. And when they're there, we have to not look through the Eurocentric lens of providing education for them.
Hmm.
We have to understand that they come from a different culture. Now, there's only one race, that's the human race,
Hmm.
right? I was telling Ali this earlier. I said, if you take out a carton of eggs, 12 eggs, and you use Easter colors on them, do they all of a sudden become some different thing
Right.
outside of an egg? They're
Right.
still eggs, they're just different colors.
Right.
So my argument is we're all one race, human race, but we come from different cultures.
Hmm.
Understand these cultures, adapt to these particular cultures. And I understand that individuals might be a little bit more assimilated to the Eurocentric ways of thinking than others. But there's individuals who are part of the counterculture, who look through life and through an Afrocentric lens, or for Latinos or Asians, and normalize being educated from that sense. And representation. And this is for all the individuals who are listening who are going to be teachers. If you are not European American and you are a minority, please become a teacher. We need more representation.
Hmm.
That's like someone coming into your own home and teaching your children how you want things to be done. You're the best person to teach your own people. Not saying that white Americans cannot teach minorities, or minorities can't teach white Americans. I'm not saying that. But when you look at how you're able to understand things naturally, how you're able to understand, have the proper representation for them to learn, because we were talking about this earlier, who's delivering the message, that at
Hmm.
times can make a huge difference. We need more individuals to be a part of this. Now, when it comes to women, in my opinion, being more in the higher educational system than men, you have to look at how many women are being produced. You know what I mean? If I remember correctly, there's been more women in the world than there are males, right? So that in itself, it's already going to be skewed. You have
Hmm.
more women in the world, you're going to have more, women at the higher educational system than men. But what's also attached to that is this idea of how they are feminizing higher education, or education in itself, right? Women get a good education so they can have certain jobs, but men go into the workforce so they can
Hmm.
provide for the family. So there's this social norm or rhetoric, rhetoric of how men are supposed to go about things. And it's almost a sense where you see someone who's getting a higher education where men who are not tend to feminize those individuals because we're educated. And that shouldn't be the way it's supposed to be at all, because you pointed out this earlier, that men traditionally were the ones that were being educated. So education does not have a culture attached to it. It doesn't have a gender attached. Education is for everyone. But what happens though is that when we talk about these self-inflicted obstacles and oppression, individuals who are part of this tend to buy into it, this idea that there is no place for African Americans or other disenfranchised groups to go and get a good education, or whites only, right? Or I don't want to go to school because that's only for females. I'm just going to become a welder. They're they're cutting themselves short, and then building into this generational curse of ignorance and poverty, right? We need to break that by understanding that education is it doesn't have any eyes. It doesn't have a lens. It's just it can be applied to anyone and everyone if they're willing to accept it and be accountable for their own education.
Mhm.
And so as educators, we have to understand that we have to make it normal for other individuals outside of European American to educate others, make it normal. But at the same time, we have to glorify, speaking as a minority, glorify this idea of education as opposed to other things that society has uh, pushed, right? Has advocated for us as far as going to prison, joining gangs, being a rapper, being a basketball player, selling drugs, right? We have to understand that education needs to be glorified over all of them. Because even if you are the best basketball player, you can't read a contract, it's worthless.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I'm not trying to kill anyone's dreams out there becoming a basketball player or football player, but that's not all you are designed to do. Basketball will end eventually. Football will end. Not everybody can rap. I love Jay-Z. Can't rap like him. You know what I mean? So we have to be real with ourselves, and not only that, have a backup plan of education, because education could take you anywhere in the world. So instead of us trying to be that entertainer, let's try to be that individual who hires entertainers, who owns the record companies, owns the record label, as opposed to just being the supportive help. As you can see, this is conversation that we can go on and on about this,
Right.
because I think this is very important for people to understand. So many times individuals of color are trying to focus on things that are not as important, right? Let's strive to be lawyers, let's strive to be doctors, but at the same time, the system is not in our favor because the system wasn't designed for us at all. It was designed for European Americans or people part of the status quo. So it's like, real quick, if the people argue the system doesn't want us to integrate, it doesn't want us to separate, it doesn't want us to educate, what does it want us to do? Some people argue the system just wants people who are disenfranchised and marginalized. It just wants us to die. And that is a very hard statement to say, but it's true. And that's not just white people. That's everybody who's a part of it, who believes and endorses this system. And it's hard to swallow, but it's our own people at times.
Mhm.
That's the most impactful group, is your own people trying to hold you down. And we have to go away from that. But how do we do that? And that's the reason why we're having a conversation like this.
Right. I think that's important, this idea of like supporting one another. And there's two things I want to touch on, and I want to give you the last word. One of the things I'll start with is this representation idea. And I hear it all the time in higher education, but diversifying your faculty and diversifying your staff and that kind of thing. And I think there's a lot of validity to that. But I think almost, I don't know if I want to say it's more important, but I really enjoyed what you said about outside of school. We need to start having that representation as well, because if it almost feels like if all the responsibility is in the school, then the only time that's happening for students is at the school. When to me it seems it'd be even more powerful if outside of school in society there was these individuals, these role models who were doing the same, who were building up students and showing here's a different direction to take. And that kind of ties into what you're talking about with feminizing education. Instead of looking at education or being vulnerable and being open to new ideas, instead of the male kind of approach, which is be tough, don't be vulnerable, that kind of thing. If you're going to go in education and actually become educated, you're going to have to be vulnerable. You're going to have to be okay with learning new things and being wrong. And so in liberal studies, I see it a lot with future educators where let's say I have a class of 100, you saw it in my last, when you came in for the class, probably 90 of those students are female.
Mm-hmm.
And so then what happens is you have this, this cyclical of where going into KA is female educators who, you know, generally speaking, sensitive, care about their students. But those boys that are in those, all they're seeing for the most part are someone who cares means is attached to a female. And then as they get into high school and the math and sciences and histories and higher education, you start seeing males popping up. So without even really, if you don't think about it, what you're seeing is, okay, a caring environment, that's female. More black and white, more rational thought, that's male. And if we don't have anybody that breaks through those two things, then you just continue this cycle of developing the same kind of individual.
Absolutely.
So I think that's important, an aspect as well that you touched on. I'm gonna give you the last word, and then I'm gonna go finish my fence.
Okay, yeah. So I'm gonna make this real quick. We'll see. Leave it to the viewers if they want to do a part 2 or not, because I think there's a lot of good information that a lot of future educators need to know from African American male perspective. A lot of times you just get it from the individuals who are part of the status quo. I think it's important to diversify the education because, especially in a sense, from the K through 12, right? It's basically law that your kid has to be in school. It's more important to diversify it there than in the real world, because parents who are bigots, prejudices, can keep their kids from certain spots where there's diversity there. But if you have it in the schools, there's two things. They can't avoid it.
Right.
So a lot of these prejudices that are trying to be instilled in their children are being knocked down because Mr. Leon is not like that.
Or at least confused.
Male. Exactly. And number two, when let's say Mr. Leon is an African American male, when young little Glynn is going to school, he can say, you know what, education is for me as well. So it's beneficial for not only just Black students, but for all students to break down a lot of the barriers, right? They can't run from them. They have to face it, head on. So while the parent is sitting there telling them, oh, these people are bad, they're like, no, that's not true, because I have, you know what I mean?
Right.
So, but it takes a very brave institution to diversify, take risks, actively look for diversity, not just say, well, we've been trying, but you're really not trying. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you really want to diversify, you'll find a way to do that. When you talked about this idea of an educator, it tends to be the nurturer, right? That tends to be linked to feminization, motherly. But the thing about it, though, is that there are fathers, right, that are nurturing. If you're a father, you're a nurturer. If you're an older brother, you're a nurturer. Even a younger brother, uncle. So nurturing is not just a part of being a female. It's about being a human being, having compassion. So when people ask me, what is education? Education should be instilled in individuals with compassion and empathy and fortitude. Fortitude is more than just courage, right? We have to be able to do this from all different outlooks on life. You cannot just do it from a Eurocentric lens, because you're only going to get one population who can continue to overshadow everyone else. But it's hard to have racial democracy in a capitalist society, because it allows individuals who have it to have, and the have-nots to keep not having anything, right? On a caste system based on color, skin color. So that's a little bit deeper, and obviously we need more time. But my opinion is, white people in general need to continue to have these conversations. I know there's a lot of white guilt that's attached to this conversation. A lot of times people don't want to talk about it, but it needs to happen, because what's happening is that these conversations are taking place, and the world is shifting. The educational world, everything is shifting. So what's going to happen is you're going to be left behind. And all of a sudden, now you're not left behind, but now you become part of the problem. So if we want to stay on cutting edge, we have to grow with the times and understand that education is definitely diversified and representation is needed if we want to be effective. Because sometimes people try to bring in equity, but it's not accurate equity. Representation is definitely part of equity.
There's one of the things you reminded me of, and I'll try to share it in a little, feels weird saying this because you watch so many YouTube videos, but I'll try to leave it in the comments down below this video. One of my students sent me a TED Talk as a female lawyer in Nevada who is a divorce lawyer. She talks about, she takes the case from the father's side. And so she talks about how the laws are set up and policies set up for the mother overwhelmingly to take the child in a divorce, and how when you look at rates of suicide and homelessness and criminality, there's a tendency of fatherless children. And so her whole point was, if we need to start developing more opportunity for fathers to have the same role, and to also show that nurturing, there's a different way that males nurture their children than females do. So for an example, what she brought up was a story that when she was younger, for an Easter egg hunt, I guess her dad would always hide like money in one of the best Easter eggs. And one year she was finally found it, and she was used to that happening, and she opened it up and it was a piece of dog crap and he laughed and laughed, and his whole point was, sometimes you're going to do everything right and you're still going to get dog crap, right?
Absolutely.
And try to teach her a lesson. And that wasn't a nurturing, like gentle, warm approach. It was a nurturing approach, but it was a male way of going about that, right? And if we lose that, and that goes the same thing for the female, the mom side of things, if we lose those things, then what you're losing is basically half of this approach to nurturing a child. And so I think that ties in directly to, obviously, with the gender conversation we had, but also with the cultural and the race conversation as well. Thank you.
You're welcome, my man. Yeah, anytime. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
It's give me something better to do than my yard, man. I tell you what, though, my yard is immaculate.
It's funny, like
nowhere.
We were joking. Annie and I would take walks around the neighborhood. Like, everybody's yard looks wonderful. Everybody's out. They have time to do that.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm getting my steps in, man. Oh,
yeah.
I'm eating like crap, though. I'm not gonna lie. I still been going out and eating a lot, but but by the grace of God, and we're all healthy, and Allie's healthy, and
good.
So we're all doing well. But thank you, man. Anytime.
Annie found, just real quick, Annie found, you're talking about the eating. She's found a meme online that said, so have you seen My 600-Pound Life, that TV show?
No.
So there's a 600-Pound Life, this show that follows someone who's struggling with weight. And it says, so when this quarantine's over with, do I contact My 600-Pound Life, or do they get a hold of me? I thought that was perfect for, like, well, same thing. You're just sitting around eating to pass the time.
Oh, man.
It means a lot to me, Glynn. I appreciate it, and I miss having our discussions. So this was nice just to catch up.
Definitely. Absolutely, man. Yeah, you take care. Hopefully hear from you soon.
All right. Thank you, buddy.
You're welcome.